Good evening, gospel revolutionaries around this whole world. Thank you so much for joining me here in this wonderful office that you guys provided us. And as you know, I really like it here. And again, thank you. I wanted to do another session. I'm doing my best to get through the term Genia on the term generation, but there's other things that are translated as generation, and I keep bumping into this stuff. So we are continuing the teaching on generation. It's very important. It's extremely important to understand Jesus' comments about the generation that he was in, and that we not feel the right to move that generation into some point in the future, especially anywhere beyond the cross. The last generation to ever be counted in God's time was the generation that was alive when Jesus died on the cross. After Jesus died on the cross and rose again, there's only been one generation that has been going now for over 2,000 years. It's called the generation of the righteous. It's very clear. It's very simple. It's great. I want to start out though. Daniel sent me a text after his work today, and he was asking me about working through a comment from Richard Murray. Many of you know Richard Murray. He is a mystic teacher of the mystic gospel. You have to call it a mystic gospel because it's not the gospel. So, but many people do listen to him, and especially a lot of the other guys that we have aforementioned. And this was the statement that was up, and Daniel was talking about how that, how do you deal with this? It sounds so right, but is so wrong. So let's look at it and see if Daniel's just all lathered up about nothing, or see what is going on here. So this is the quote that is on Facebook today from Richard Murray. It's not that Jesus translates God for us. It's that Jesus is the translation of God. Sounds profound, and yet it is profoundly incorrect. My goodness. So what is wrong with this? Number one, the whole thing about everybody wanting to claim that what Jesus said about his Father applied to everybody before Jesus. It only applied to Jesus. What Jesus said about his Father was about his Father. And even when Peter got the revelation of who the Christ was, he didn't tell Peter, your Father revealed this to you. He said, my Father revealed this to you. So it's important to listen closely to what Jesus said and what Jesus actually taught. We're going through still 50 of the teachings of Christ. I tell you, if you ever want to have your eyes opened to this powerful ministry of the teacher of Jesus Christ before the cross, Daniel and I, the one coming out this Friday, you don't have room for it. You just don't have room for it. It is one of the most magnificent things I have ever seen. We're going to teach this Friday on a subject of Jesus's teachings that no one has ever taught on this ever before. And what we found is that Paul did teach on this one teaching of Christ, and boy, did he nail it. So you got to stay tuned for Friday. So Mr. Murray, goodness, fine man. We know nothing bad about this gentleman whatsoever. But we do know that he is admittedly mystic. There's mystics out of every religion. There's Islamic mystics. There's Hindu mystics. There's mystics for every religion out there. What basically is a mystic? Quite a few years ago, I did a great deal of research about the mystics. Mystics basically of every religion take the bad God, the mean God, the God nobody likes God, and removes him from the text, whether it's from Islamic text or biblical text, Hebrew text, New Testament text. It doesn't make any difference which one. A mystic simply says, I don't give a crap what the Bible says. This is how I see it. And that's the thing, is that we have a whole generation of that. This is the way I see it, and that's okay. And it's okay with us too. We're not trying to twist your arm, but we do feel obligated to compare these teachings that are being spread and compare them to what actually was said. Is there anything in the Bible that says, first off, that Jesus translates God for us? Nothing says that Jesus translates God for us. It's amazing, but see, when you're mystic, all you have to do is say something. You don't, oh, they need a verse. You know, they're offended by doctrine, but this is a doctrine. This statement is a doctrine, and they claim to have none. However, the statement itself is a doctrine. It's not that Jesus translates God. God doesn't need translated for you or I or anyone else. And he says that it is that Jesus is the translation of God. No, Jesus was the Son of God, and he was the first begotten of the Father. The thing that this entire mindset will not accept is that when Jesus spoke about his Father, he wasn't talking about their Father, because their Father was not his Father. And when he spoke about his Father, he even said, he's not your Father. It gets to the point of ridiculousness. But that is a fact. But that's the one that they have to look through the lens. And if you look through that lens of the relationship of God the Father with his first and only begotten Son, do we not accept that? That Jesus was the first and only begotten of the Father. And that is the relationship that is being expressed in the life, the 30-year life of Jesus Christ. Yes, even his death, burial, and resurrection is a part of the relationship that Jesus had with his Father. It was his Father he was talking to in the Garden of Gethsemane as he was talking about what he was about to face. So, but when you've decided something that you don't want to think and don't want to accept as truth, that is truth, you can say whatever you want, and that's okay with us. We're not mad at nobody. But the truth is the truth, and the power of the gospel is the truth. Jesus never said anything about his relationship with God. He always talked about his relationship with his Father. And he even told them, he said, God is my Father. And that's what they tried to stone him for, because God was nobody's father. Abraham was their father. They made that very clear to Jesus. You can't go around saying God's your father. That's blasphemy. And it was blasphemous to the average Jew, to the average Hebrew, because Abraham was their father, not God. And but you see, if you reject what Jesus himself said about it, and even those around him agreed with him that God was not their father, they didn't like it that he said their father was the devil. But You're going to see a little bit more about that as we get into this, and we've already gone into 10 minutes. Uh, uh, even Jesus said that God was not their father. Richard Murray teaches that Jesus redefines God. Jesus and his Father, that translates as father-son relationship for 30 years. This brand new thing on planet Earth with Jesus Christ was that God was now a father of his offspring. Never ever happened before with human beings. God created human beings, but this was the first begotten. It just really feels crazy that I have to talk to Bible-knowing people and point out these very powerful directives about if you're going to learn something, learn the context of it. And Richard, you are completely wrong. Jesus is not the translation of God. What Jesus, even if Jesus did translate something for us, it was a translation of his Father and he, not the whole world. That didn't happen until Jesus rose from the dead. That's the other part we got a problem with. That and the virgin birth and, stuff like that. Jesus did not translate God. And let me tell you one thing he definitely did not do. He did not redefine God. In fact, if you read Jesus's teachings, he was constantly reaffirming that this God who was angry and wrathful throughout the 4,000 year history, not of the entire 4,000 years, but a large chunk of the 4,000 year history of the world up until then. And Jesus made that very clear that he had things to say to these people who God was not their father. The power of the work of the cross is that God has become everybody's father. We are the offspring through one. We are the offspring through one. Just as we were the offspring through one called Adam, the whole universe of people are now the offspring of God through Christ. It's a very simple equation. My 10-year-old grandson understands this. But Jesus lived for 30 years. His entire life and ministry was definitely a relationship between his Father and he. God had no other sons. God had no other sons. And we had the manifestation of the Son of God, and that manifestation of the Son of God taught on by Paul in the book of Romans was the manifestation of Jesus Christ. And of course, the rest of the teaching of Romans is that the entire human race became manifested as the sons of God. No, we're not groaning and waiting for this. It's not something that we're yearning for and looking for. It's time to wake up and enjoy this sonship instead of striving to set yourself apart somehow. That's what you call self-righteousness. So we got into Matthew 1:1, and the thing that we found in our last session was that Matthew 1:1 was not the term Genea. We found out that Matthew 1:1 was the term Genesis. And in this, the term Genesis in Matthew 1:1, he said that Christ, the Genesis of Christ, was in Abraham and in David. Abraham and in David. But see, he's just telling us those two lines. So the Genesis of Christ, remember we told you how that the Genesis of the church actually started at the giving of the law. Not that the law created the church, but that it was just two simultaneous events. We've never taught on that yet. And we will when we can get around to it. And so this word, though, that Christ had a genesis in Abraham, Christ had a genesis in David. And we're going to be teaching you on the 1,000-year reign of Christ. You have got so much, oh my gosh, the 1,000-year reign of Christ, which we have found, the 1,000-year reign of Christ, which began 1,000 years before the cross, and it ended with a victory over death at the cross. Oh my, oh my, oh my. We're going to go through all of that with you, all the things, everything written about Jesus being seated during that time at the right hand of the throne of God, which you know as well as I do, Christianity puts that out into the future. There's good reason why they do. But once you learn the scriptures, you know that that view also is incorrect. So that's going to be coming up in the Canada conference. Gosh, folks, that's just 3 or 4 weeks away. So we're going to have a hard time staying off the subject, actually. So we started again to look at this term generation. And the very first thing I pulled up this time was that the term Genia, it's not, the term Genia is the one we're trying to teach on, but we found the word Genesis in the word generation in Matthew 1:1. Isn't it amazing? This was the very first verse in the entire New Testament says Christ had his origins in his Genesis was in Abraham and in David. Well, what we're going to be showing you really soon in a very well done graph is the genesis of Christ all the way back to before the foundation of the world. In the beginning was the Word. There's the genesis of Christ there. Oh my gosh, I got to shut up or I'm going to spill beans on everything. A lot of you guys are already putting this together in your head. You can already see it. But we're going to have it laid out in a chart, beautiful chart. And we're going to get this into your hands. We're going to try to get it done as a download, and we can send it to you, and you can print it right off on your computer. You'll see the genesis of Christ all the way through from before the foundation of the world to the cross. Every single place there's a genesis of Christ, and one of them is going to be the 1,000-year reign of Christ, whose genesis was in David and went through the cross. Folks, you're not getting this from any place else. And I hear my critics as to why they're not. So Jesus, the translation of this word, generation, is used again. And there's going to be a couple of them. I've not secluded one from another where it's actually a repeat. So forgive me if I start reading one and we already read it in Matthew or Mark or Luke, that it's repeated again. But I wanted to go ahead and get this out because my time was running short on getting this out to you tonight. So Matthew chapter 3, verse 7 says, "But when he saw many of the Pharisees and Sadducees come to his baptism, he said unto them, O generation of vipers." Now, who was this? These were the top leaders, that specifically the Pharisees and Sadducees, which one of them would have been Paul. We don't know if Paul was there, but Paul was definitely a Pharisee. He definitely showed up at a lot of important places, that's for sure. And when he was baptizing people, he said unto them, O generation of vipers, who hath warned you to flee from the wrath to come? Well, now, you know, wrath doesn't mean wrath. Well, it actually means punishment, violent passion. A lot of people like to take the term passion and say, oh, this is the passion of Christ. And this is worked out many times in Catholicism. They call the cross the passion of the Christ, but they don't try to take out the violence part of it. But what modern day mystics have done is taken the word passion and taken it like, oh, the great passion of Christ. Well, the term that describes this is violent passion. Passion does not mean a loving thing. Oh, I'm just violent. I love you violently. That's not what it means. It means this is a violence that was coming out. It's very clear, and it is the term orge, and it is used many times by Christ himself. And if they're fleeing from the passion to come, who warned you, generation of vipers, to flee from God's wonderful passion? It's just stupid. All right, so please don't flee from God's wonderful passion. But these people, Jesus said to them, who warned you about fleeing from the violent anger of God, the punishment, the judgment, the wrath? It's all translated in this way. The word indignation is also used as a translation for the word orge. I know that God's not angry anymore. See, this is the strange place when you understand the gospel. It does put you at odds with almost everyone, because the mystics and the aforementioned don't believe that God was ever angry, defying the largest percentage of verses in the entire Hebrew scriptures, and Jesus saying the reason you can't believe me is because you can't believe Moses, because Moses spoke of me. We're going to be showing you every place where Moses spoke of him in this coming. Oh, you just got to be there. We are going to show you all the places Jesus was referring to when he said Moses spoke of him. He said, if you would have believed Moses, you might have been able to understand what Jesus himself said. But that's why they don't, because they don't believe that. Then you've got the Christian group who still think that God is still angry and that a judgment is coming, because they've taken this term generation and moved it to wherever they wanted, because they can't accept that God, through the power of Jesus Christ, redeemed the whole world in that generation and created a generation that will never end, called the generation of the righteous. Did I just get excited? I hope you're getting excited about the truth. Yeah, I'm going over. I lie all the time. So this term is Genema, G-E-N-N-E-M-A. So this term, you generation of vipers, this word actually means offspring. Now, Jesus knew who he was the offspring of. He was the offspring of his Father. He just told them they were the offspring of vipers. And the term vipers just means poisonous snakes, literally or figuratively. Jesus was not of that generation, because he was not the fruit of anything on this earth. This means offspring. He was not the offspring of anything on the earth. He was the offspring of God. And but Jesus is dealing with the people in this generation and letting them know who they are the offspring of. And he said, who's warned you about this to come? And Matthew 12:34 says, O generation of vipers, how can you, being evil, speak good things? For out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaketh. Now, Jesus is talking about this offspring of vipers. You see, this generation that was alive was the culmination of 4,000 years of generations to a generation that had devolved into a generation of vipers. God was the father of one man on earth. It was Jesus Christ. So when Jesus is talking about the Father and how great the Father is and what the Father means to him and how he and the Father get along, it wasn't about you at that time. Now, you can take everything Jesus said wonderful about the Father, and it is applicable now even to the people that we don't like. But see, that's just too consistent. It's just too reasonable, too rational. We want to think something more spiritual. We want to think something more judgmental. Depends on what you want. Why do we turn away from the scriptures? Because you want to believe that God never was angry, so you want to be mystical about that. And then if you're a Christian, you don't want to believe what the gospel says because you're not willing to let go of your judgment to come on a generation that Jesus already said that generation was standing right in front of him. And now he's telling them more specifically, you are the offspring of vipers. And this was the cream of the crop. But I say unto you, this is Matthew 26, verse 29, just to show you that this is about the offspring or the fruit of. This one is not about this generation. It's translated as the word fruit, but I want you to see where it is used that way. But I say unto you, I will not drink henceforth of this fruit, that is ganima. I will not drink of the ganima of the vine. So you see what Jesus is saying to them when he calls them the ganima of vipers? Goodness, you're the poison of vipers. The same as wine comes from the vine, your poison has come from your Father, not mine. I'm getting excited again. Same thing in Matthew 14:25. I promise we're going to wrap this up in a second. Again, in Luke 3:7 is the repeat of this story. Who warned you, generation, you ganima of vipers, to flee from the orge to come. Well, maybe Jesus got it right in Luke. Evidently, he didn't get it right in Matthew, according to. But see, folks, this ganima of vipers is not today. It's not where you get to judge people that don't agree with you. It's not where you get to judge people who don't live like you, talk like you, the color of you, or anything else. Because in Christ, we are all one. But it was never true before we got in Christ. We didn't get in Christ at his genesis. We got into Christ at the very end of the age. And then a whole new age started. I hope you're enjoying this. I sure as heck am. Then the very same things about the kingdom, and that's it. So we had to get this word ganima of the word generation kind of out of the way, if you will. But it's really shone a light on this thing about this. What about this generation? This generation was the offspring of vipers. There's something about this generation that Jesus made it clear this is the generation all judgment is going to fall upon. I hope you track with the gospel and find out what Jesus did. Because all judgment, all wrath, who warned you? How could you know? How could you know? You're not even of my Father. How could you know what his plan was? Who warned you? Who warned you? Well, we have nothing to warn you about except to encourage you to please stop and think when you're listening to me or anybody else. Look and see whether it's rational. And when people try to force you through that little hole of understanding and say, you've got to see the whole 4,000 years of history before the cross through the relationship between God and Jesus. That is an unmitigated lie. If you see all 4,000 years of history of God's relationship with the human race through the relationship of the Father, God, and his Son, his only begotten Son, you will deny the work of Christ, Why does this same man deny these works as being applicable to the salvation and redemption of the world? Because he denies the 4,000 years of history that Moses wrote about, which was all about Christ. And you can't believe what Jesus did. You cannot know the work of the cross if you don't know the work of God spoken of by Moses. Now, God's at peace. I'm a little upset. God's not a little upset. Not even a little bit. Not with anybody.